First of all, let me correct something. I never owned a town. Never. I never bought a town. I don't have $20 million. I never did.
The moment did not unfold in public view. There were no headlines at first, no dramatic announcements, no sudden wave of attention signaling what had already begun to change. And yet, behind the quiet distance that often surrounds celebrity life, something significant had shifted in the financial world of Kim Basinger. What appeared on the surface to be a story of long-standing success and stability was, in reality, far more complicated, shaped by decisions, risks, and consequences that would slowly redefine her financial legacy. For years, Kim Basinger had been known not only for her success in Hollywood, but also for the level of independence she maintained in her career. She was not simply an actress following the industry's direction. She made bold choices, often stepping into projects and investments with a level of confidence that reflected both ambition and control. But within those decisions lay a vulnerability that would only become visible over time. The turning point did not come from a single event, but from a series of interconnected pressures. Financial commitments, legal disputes, and high-risk investments began to overlap in ways that gradually strained the foundation she had built. One of the most defining moments came when she became involved in the purchase of an entire town. An ambitious move that reflected vision, but also carried significant financial risk. When the expected returns failed to materialize, the weight of that decision began to grow. At the same time, contractual obligations within the film industry introduced additional complications. Legal challenges emerged, bringing financial penalties that extended far beyond initial expectations. These were not minor setbacks. They were structural pressures, the kind that affect not only income, but long-term financial stability. And as those pressures accumulated, the reality became increasingly difficult to ignore. What made the situation particularly striking was its contrast with public perception. To the outside world, success appeared intact. Appearances continued. The image of stability remained. But behind that image, financial restructuring was already underway. Assets were reconsidered. Commitments adjusted. The focus shifted from expansion to preservation. Within this context, the idea of a lost fortune is less about sudden collapse and more about gradual erosion. Wealth built over years can be reshaped by a combination of ambition and circumstance. In Basinger's case, the very qualities that contributed to her success, independence, risk-taking, and confidence, also played a role in the challenges she faced. From a broader perspective, her story reflects a recurring pattern within the entertainment industry. Financial success does not always guarantee long-term security, especially when large-scale decisions intersect with unpredictable outcomes. It is a reminder that influence and visibility often exist alongside complexity, and that the realities behind them are rarely as simple as they appear. In the end, the narrative is not defined solely by loss, but by transformation, because even as financial structures change, the legacy of career, the impact of performances, and the recognition built over decades remain intact. And within that contrast lies a deeper story, one not of sudden destruction, but of a shifting foundation that reveals the true cost of ambition when it meets uncertainty. The shift did not conclude with the initial financial strain. In many ways, that period marked the beginning of a longer process, one defined not by sudden collapse, but by careful adjustment and gradual recovery. For Kim Basinger, the challenge was no longer about expansion or high-risk ambition. It became about stabilization, about regaining control over a financial structure that had grown increasingly complex. Behind the scenes, restructuring efforts began to take shape. Legal matters had to be addressed with precision, negotiations carried out with patience, and financial obligations recalibrated in a way that allowed for long-term sustainability. This was not a public process. It unfolded quietly through advisors, legal teams, and strategic decisions made far from the spotlight. Each step required balance, protecting what remained while resolving what had been lost. At the same time, her relationship with the film industry evolved. The pace of projects shifted, and the types of roles she considered began to reflect a more measured approach. This was not a retreat, but a recalibration. Instead of pursuing constant visibility, the focus moved toward selectivity. choosing opportunities that align not only with creative interests, but also with stability and control. What makes this phase particularly important is how it contrasts with the earlier period of risk, where once there had been bold, large-scale decisions, there was now a deliberate emphasis on caution. Investments were approached differently. Commitments were evaluated more carefully. The experience itself became a form of insight, a practical understanding of how quickly financial structures can change when exposed to pressure. Public perception, however, did not always reflect this transition. To many observers, the narrative remained simplified, a rise followed by a fall. But the reality was far more layered. It involved resilience, adaptation, and a willingness to navigate complexity without turning it into spectacle. In an industry where personal challenges are often amplified, this quieter approach stood out. Over time, stability began to return, not in dramatic fashion, but through consistency. Gradual progress replaced sudden shifts. Financial clarity replaced uncertainty. And while the scale of wealth may have changed, the sense of control began to reestablish itself. From a documentary perspective, this stage of the story is just as significant as the earlier challenges, because it reveals something deeper than loss. It reveals response, how an individual adjusts when circumstances change, how decisions evolve after experience, and how resilience is often built not through public victories, but through private correction. In the end, the narrative extends beyond the idea of a destroyed fortune. It becomes a study in balance between ambition and caution, between risk and responsibility, and between public image and private reality. And within that balance lies a quieter, more enduring form of strength, one that does not rely on headlines, but on the ability to rebuild when circumstances demand it. The period that followed was not defined by dramatic headlines or public statements. Instead, it unfolded in a quieter, more controlled way, a phase where recovery was measured not in sudden gains, but in steady correction. For Kim Basinger, the challenge had shifted from managing success to managing consequence. And that shift required a different kind of discipline, one rooted in patience rather than momentum. Financial restructuring is rarely a simple process, especially when it involves high-value assets, legal obligations, and long-term commitments. In her case, each decision had to be weighed carefully. Properties that once represented investment and expansion were now reconsidered through a different lens, one focused on sustainability. Advisors played a critical role during this time, helping to navigate complex financial landscapes while ensuring that future risks were minimized. It was not about rebuilding everything at once. It was about creating a stable foundation that could support gradual recovery. At the same time, the emotional aspect of such a transition cannot be ignored. Moving from a position of financial strength to one of adjustment often brings a level of reflection that goes beyond numbers. It raises questions about past decisions, about trust and opportunities, and about the balance between ambition and caution. For someone who had built a career on confidence and independence, this phase likely required a recalibration, not just a strategy, but a perspective. Her presence in Hollywood continued, but it evolved. Rather than pursuing constant visibility, there was a noticeable shift toward selectivity. Projects were chosen with greater care, and the focus appeared to move toward roles that offered meaning and stability rather than scale alone. This approach reflected a broader understanding that long-term consistency often holds more value than short-term expansion. What makes this stage particularly compelling is how it challenges the common narrative surrounding financial loss. The idea of a destroyed fortune suggests a sudden end, a complete collapse. But in reality, situations like this are far more complex. They involve layers of adjustment, negotiation, and gradual rebuilding. Wealth in this context is not simply lost, it is reshaped. And the process of reshaping it requires resilience that is rarely visible to the public. Over time, signs of stability began to reappear, not in the form of major announcements, but through consistency. Financial obligations became more manageable. Professional decisions aligned more closely with long-term goals. The uncertainty that once defined the situation began to fade, replaced by a clearer sense of direction. It was a quieter form of progress, but one that carried lasting impact. From a broader perspective, her experience reflects a larger truth about the entertainment industry and beyond. Success and risk often exist side by side. The same confidence that leads to major opportunities can also open the door to significant challenges. And when those challenges emerge, the ability to adapt becomes just as important as the ability to achieve. In the end, the story does not rest on loss alone. It extends into recovery, into the deliberate effort to regain control and rebuild stability. For Kim Basinger, that process became a defining chapter, one that revealed not just the cost of ambition, but the strength required to navigate its consequences. And perhaps that is where the deeper meaning lies. Not in the moment when things begin to fall apart, but in what follows, the decisions made in response, the discipline required to move forward, and the quiet determination to rebuild without needing to announce it to the world. The deeper phase of this transformation unfolded not in isolation, but as part of a long, evolving journey, one where time itself became a crucial factor. For Kim Basinger, recovery was not about returning to a previous version of success. It was about redefining what stability meant after experiencing the consequences of high-stakes decisions. And that distinction shaped every move that followed. Financial recovery at that level often requires more than simply correcting past mistakes. It demands a restructuring of mindset, a shift from expansion-driven thinking to sustainability-focused planning. In practical terms, this meant reassessing priorities. Investments were no longer judged solely by potential returns, but by their level of risk exposure. Commitments were reviewed not just for opportunity, but for long-term impact. Each decision became more deliberate, more calculated, and more aligned with preserving balance rather than chasing growth. At the same time, the industry around her continued to evolve. Hollywood itself was changing. New platforms emerging, audience expectations shifting, and the nature of celebrity adapting to a more connected world. Within this environment, maintaining relevance required a different kind of engagement. For Basinger, this did not mean constant reinvention, but rather a quiet consistency. Her presence, though less frequent, carried a sense of experience and credibility that could not be easily replicated. There is also an important human element within this story, one that often goes unspoken in narratives focused on wealth and loss. The process of rebuilding involves resilience not just in financial terms, but in personal confidence. Experiencing significant setbacks can alter how decisions are approached, how risks are perceived, and how trust is placed in opportunities. Regaining that confidence, while maintaining caution, is a delicate balance. It requires learning from the past without becoming defined